All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpinka, and I am the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed to our YouTube page, so please be aware of the webcam there. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of Indigenous Ingenuity, a celebration of traditional North American knowledge by Deidre Havrelock and Edward Kay, published by Little Brown Books for Young Readers. Thank you to Deidre for being here tonight and to Edward for joining us virtually from Toronto. Thanks also to our special guests for the evening, musicians Chubby Cree and our moderator, Teena Nelson. Teena Nelson is from Atakakoop First Nation. Married with 2 children, she is an educator and the owner of a small business called Come On Turtle. She enjoys playing soccer and working with Indigenous youth. I will now turn things over to Teena. Please give her a warm welcome. All right, good evening. So my name is Teena, so I'm from Atakakoop First Nation, and I want to welcome and thank you all for coming to the launch of Indigenous Ingenuity, a celebration of traditional North American knowledge. This book is a Junior Library Guild selection and has also received a starred review from Booklist and has this to say about the book: engaging and informative. This will be welcomed by both STEM and social studies curricula to help correct prevailing narratives about Indigenous technology. And before I move on to the authors, I'd like to welcome Chubby Cree with Carol Powder and Noah Green. This grandmother-grandson singing and drumming duo is from Edmonton, Alberta, Alexander First Nation. They travel extensively, and in a minute or two, they will be singing Blessings Upon Us and this fabulous book, Indigenous Ingenuity. Also, I'd like to announce that Deidre Havrelock has a picture book called The Heartbeat Drum coming out next year with Abrams Books for young readers. This book tells the story of how Carol's Mushum taught her to drum. Now on to the authors. Edward Kay is an award-winning showrunner, screenwriter, and author based in Toronto. He wrote the critically acclaimed Gross Science book series for Kids Can Press, and it's currently being adapted by television by Shaftesbury Films. He has created 4 kids television series, including Jimmy Two Shoes for Disney, and the science program Finding Stuff Out for TVO and Discovery Kids. And Ed, you can say hi now.
Hello, glad to be here.
Welcome. All right. Deidre Havrelock is a children's author and a member of Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Alberta, Canada. She was raised in Edmonton, but now calls Saskatoon her home. Her debut picture book, Buffalo Wild, was written here in Saskatoon and was released in 2021 by Anna Press. Her upcoming titles include Buffalo, the enduring story of Buffalo and the first peoples of North America, Why We Dance, The Heartbeat Drum, and the Nellie Carlson Elder and Activist. And now for something very special. We have 2 songs from Chubby Cree, and the first will be an honor song, and the second is called Rock Your World. And for the honor song, we ask that the men take off their hats.
Come on, everyone, get up in there. Don't be shy tonight. Setting by the door to the floor. I'm the okay, I'm gonna. Your world. Hey, oh, hey, hey, hey. Way up, way up, way up, way up, way up. Way up, way up, way up, way up, way up. Oh, hey, oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, hey, yo. Come on, everyone, get up in there. Don't be shy tonight. Cause standing by the door to the court, young who can help. I'm gonna your world. Hey, oh, hey, hey, hey. Wait up, wait up, wait up, wait up. Wait up, wait up, wait up, wait up, wait up. Oh, hey, oh, hey, hey. Hey, oh, hey, hey, yo. Come on, everyone, get up in there. Oh, very shy tonight. standing by the door, sit down, only who can, only know.
All right, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so now I'd like to invite Deidre up to read from Indigenous Ingenuity.
One second. I'm Deidre Havrelock. Thank you, Alyssa, for the introductions. Thank you, Teena. Thank you, Chubby Cree. Thank you so much for coming. A big thank you to McNally Robinson for hosting this event. Before I do a reading from this wonderful book, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal writing journey and how I came to be part of this project. So this is a bumpy ride. Hold on to your hats. I started writing over 25 years ago when before my oldest daughter was born. And at the time I wanted to be a children's author. And so I wrote a picture book called My Cookie Says, and it was a quirky little book about cool things my grandmother said to me growing up. That book got me an agent right away. I had an agent for approximately 30 days, and then I was fired for asking too many questions. So after that, I wrote another picture book, and I wrote a kind of a historical fiction book about a little boy who goes to the signing of Treaty 6. That picture book got me a phone call from a large publishing house in Canada. On the other end, they said, Deidre, we love this book. We'd love to publish you. But we only have one spot for an Indigenous author, and it's between you and this other guy. So 3 months later, I got the phone call that said, sorry, Deidre, we're going with the other guy. So I decided at that time that I'd go back to school and maybe take some classes on writing. So I went back to school. I was living in Brooks, Alberta at the time, and I just took as many classes that I could that could possibly help me learn to write. During that time, I fell in love with memoir, and so I decided I would write a memoir. I wrote the book. That book was picked up by a publishing house in the United States right away, first publisher. It sat with them for about a year. And then just before, 3 months before it was about to hit the market, it was going to print, and they let me know that they were going to publish it as a fiction novel. And I explained that this was my life story and I didn't want it to be fiction. We had a few back and forth words, and we decided to part ways. So my memoir was not published. So after that, I decided I would go back to school again. So at this point, I was living in Saskatoon, and I went to the U of S here. And I took as many classes as I could to help me learn to write better. And at that time, I fell in love with screenwriting. I met a screenwriter who was living here in the city, and he took me under his wing and taught me how to screenwrite. And I also fell in love with theology, which is a really weird thing, but I did. And it was at that time that I was sitting out on my deck here in Saskatoon, and I had a vision, full-blown vision, and I saw millions of buffalo stampeding down from heaven to earth. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, Creator is sending the buffalo home. And I took that vision and those words, and I wrote my first picture book at this, what was it, my first, I guess, we're on the third, right? And wrote Buffalo Wild. And I sent that out to a few publishers, and I was turned down. So I took that manuscript and I shoved it in a drawer and forgot about it. Then we moved to the United States, and it was in the States that I self-published my memoir. Right here. It's a little bit scary if you like scary. And then I took all that theology studying, and I self-published a series on testimony.
And it was during that time that all of a sudden I'm in the States, I'm so far from home, from my land, and it was just a really weird time. I got to tell you, it was just really disjointing to my brain. And I kept seeing buffalo everywhere. And I kept seeing the word buffalo everywhere. And I said, no, creator, are you trying to send me a message through buffalo? Because like, this is really weird that I'm seeing buffalo all the time. And then we were on vacation in Banff. And I saw this poster and it said bison belong. And there it was about bringing the bison back to live in the wild. And there was a picture of a buffalo up in the sky on that poster. And I said, you know, creator, I think you're telling me to get that manuscript, pull it out and start working away on it again. So when I got home, I pulled it out. I sent it off to a place called We Need Diverse Books, and they had a mentorship program. I was accepted into it, and they helped me form that rather long rambling book into the right structure. And this is when I went, okay, Deidre, you got to get serious now. You got to focus, right? You've got a lot of training behind you. You know how to write. You can do this, right? And I started sending that out to publishers. I wrote 4 more picture books on the side. And a year went by, no sales. 2 years went by, no sales. On the 3rd year, I was like so tired. I had so many no's stored up. And I was like, okay, God, you got to help me out here because I think I'm going to quit. I'm at that low point where it's like I think I was almost 50. And I was like, you know, it hasn't worked out yet. And I'm at that point where I can't take another no and I want to quit. And that night I had a dream and I heard Creator say to me, today your life changes. Nothing will be the same. So I woke up, I pulled that manuscript out and I said, okay, Creator, here we go. We're sending that out one more time. I sent to a Nick Press. They bought it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Holiday House. An editor there asked if Buffalo Wild was sold. I said, yes, it's sold. She said, pitch me something else, Deidre. I pitched them a nonfiction book about buffalo. They bought it. After that, I got an agent. Her name is Amy. She's wonderful. Amy sold 2 books to Abrams Books for Young Readers for me. One of those is The Heartbeat Drum. After that, I received an email from Amy, and it was a long email, and I only got halfway through it before I sent a yes back to Amy, and it was about this book here, Indigenous Ingenuity. And all I can say is when I read that email, I thought, Deidre, this book is going to get made, and you can either watch somebody else do it, or you can jump on in and do it. And so I jumped on in. And this book to me, you know, I mean, you have to understand, growing up as a little Cree girl in school, there were no books, not a book about an Indigenous person. We grew up with nothing. I went through grade 1 to 12. And I think the only thing I ever heard was about Louis Riel Rebellion. That was it, right? So there was nothing. So when this book showed up, I thought, Deidre, this is going to help change that, you know? And so to me, this book is like looking back to my younger self and looking at, and my name is Dee Dee in my family. Looking back to my younger self and saying, Dee Dee, today your life changes. Nothing will be the same. Now I'm going to do a little reading. It's going to be short. I just want to read from the introduction so you can get a feel for what this book is about. And then I'm going to ask the kids at the back to help me out with something. But let me just get through this little boring part before we get to that. Okay. Traditional knowledge is an Indigenous term that encompasses all forms of established information, including oral traditions. The portion of traditional knowledge that this book explores includes an Indigenous nation's accumulated and stored understanding of the natural world and those inventions and discoveries that help the people live in this world. Today, we refer to this type of knowledge as STEM, which is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The wealth of information that Indigenous peoples have collected over time consists of teachings and instructions that touch upon virtually all areas of life. So there's no way a single book could capture all this content in depth. Indigenous Ingenuity provides a fun and fascinating introduction to the many areas of traditional knowledge. that Indigenous North Americans acquired in the pre-contact era, which began in 1492 when the Taino of the Caribbean made first contact with Columbus. Such knowledge includes transportation, communications, agriculture, food processing, health science, clothing, architecture, tools and weapons, math, astronomy, and even chemistry and metallurgy. Okay, now I'm going to read a few bits and pieces here and there throughout the book. And I'm going to ask the kids at the back to help me out really loud when I need you, okay? I'll let you know. We're going to say, did you know? Okay, remember those lines. That's your line. Did you know? So when I point at you, you're going to shout, did you know? Ready? Wait. In chapter 2, transportation, we learn about toboggans and friction. And we ask the question, did you know? You guys are loud back there, so I know I want to hear a little bit more. Did you know that Indigenous peoples coated the bottom of their toboggans with beeswax so they could glide more easily over the snow? You can test this out for yourself if you're lucky enough to have a toboggan, some wax, a hill, and a snowy day, which we have plenty of snowy days here in Saskatchewan. In chapter 3, communications, get ready, we're going to do it again, and I want louder. We learn about PISL, that's Plains Indian Sign Language, and we ask the question, did you know? Better. Did you know that despite the many languages spoken across the Great Plains, extensive trade took place without a problem? This is because sign language was what's the universal language of the prairies. Plains Indian Sign Language was used for trade negotiations, buffalo hunts, strategic raids, communicating from a distance, and as a primary language for the hearing impaired. You want to learn a little sign language? Point to this hand, point to this hand, use your index finger, and push out a word. That's sign language. Or hand talk. Hand talk. Moving on to chapter 4. Get ready in the back row. Agriculture and food technology. We learn about the traditional foods of North America and we ask the question, did you know that an Indigenous food pantry depended upon the seasonal round and was a high protein, low salt, and for some, largely plant-based smorgasbord. It did not include processed foods, white sugar, beef, pork, wheat, or dairy, which means that bannock is sadly not a traditional food. It was introduced during colonialism. Still love bannock though. Moving on to chapter 5, health sciences. We learn about Indigenous cough medicine and we ask the question. Oh, that's so much better. Did you know that many Indigenous healers, including those of the Cherokee, Delaware, and Haudenosaunee, used the inner bark of the black cherry tree to treat coughs? It worked because cherry bark contains a chemical called hydrogen cyanide. When taken in the right dose, it increases respiration, relaxes the bronchial tubes, calming the nerves to reduce coughing. However, it's important not to take too much because in high doses, hydrogen cyanide is deadly. So deadly that it was a favorite poison used by KGB assassins during the Soviet era in Russia. In chapter 7, architecture and civil engineering, we learn about amazing irrigation systems and we ask the question. Thank you. Did you know that the complex irrigation system built by the Pueblo was so well conceived that some of the updated canals are now part of Phoenix's municipal water system? Moving on, in chapter 9, mathematics, we learn about current Indigenous contributions to math. And we ask the question. Good. Did you know that Mary G. Ross, a member of the Cherokee Nation, was an engineer and mathematician who literally wrote the book on interplanetary spaceflight as one of the authors of the NASA Planetary Flight Handbook, Volume 3, which is all about space travel to Mars and Venus. Thank you to the kids in the back for helping me out there. That's a little bit about Indigenous Ingenuity. And now I'm going to bring Teena back. and Ed. We're gonna get to know Ed a little bit. Yeah, can you move this?
Oh, yes, sorry.
All right, thank you, Deidre. And I'm going to invite you and Ed to sit with me so I can ask you a few questions. All right, so first question. Ed, you're a children's author as well as a TV showrunner. Can you tell us what you do? What is a showrunner?
A showrunner it's a combination of different things. It's a head writer, but for example, in a live action show, the showrunner would kind of coordinate all the elements, like not just the scripts, but would work with the costume designers, the set designers, the lighting director, the cinematographer, and the director to create the overall vision for it. And in animation, which I also do, I don't do the drawing myself, but I would give the animators notes and I would direct the voice actors, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like a little bit of everything job but it starts with the writing.
Awesome, thank you. And I just wanted to know, what do you like about this job?
About being a showrunner?
Yes.
I guess it's because, you know, as a creative person, especially as a writer, often you end up getting your stuff changed, you know, and fiddled with. But when you're the showrunner, you're pretty much the final authority on everything. So, you know, you have more control over your material. But there's another thing, you know, beyond just having your material the way you want it, is that you get to work with some really amazing people. You know, like a really good cinematographer is an amazing thing. Like they'll just look at a scene and they'll say, oh, it should be like that. And then, you know, it's incredible how that can change the vision. So I'd say just the creative stimulation of working with a bunch of other really talented creative people is just so fun and really rewarding. So that's what I like about it the most.
That's awesome, thank you. Okay, I have another question for you. What inspired you to want to write a book about pre-contact Turtle Island STEM?
Yeah, you know, I'd say that goes back to my childhood because, you know, like everybody else, I read some books that, you know, history books that in retrospect were really questionable in terms of how carefully they were researched. And it came down to one thing in particular. Like I had always read that the Aztec Empire, you know, and you have to remember, these are people that built pyramids, you know, and they were somehow conquered by 600 Spanish conquistadors. And yes, they had horses and armor, but I still couldn't figure out how millions and millions of people could have been conquered by such a small number of people. And I heard, you know, that, oh, well, so, you know, the Aztecs thought the Spanish were gods. And I thought, I wonder who made that story up. Like, that sounds suspiciously like something someone with Spanish would say. And anyway, about 5 years ago, I was researching this book called Journey Science. And coincidentally, I read about how the Aztec Empire was basically destroyed by microbes. There was this one battle near what's now Mexico City where the Aztecs absolutely thrashed the Spanish conquistadors, you know, defeated them very heavily. And there was one Spanish conquistador amongst the dead who had smallpox. And when the Aztecs buried him, they got smallpox. And anthropologists now think there were probably 4 million Aztecs who died as a result of that one encounter with a person with smallpox. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. So I got curious about what Aztec society was. And then it's one of those situations where you learn one thing and it leads to something else. And then I got curious about other nations, and Deidre was mentioning that fact about in Phoenix how the water system is actually based on old canals, and I'd been there and seen them, and I just got really curious. So I started looking, and the more I found out, the more the more there was that was amazing. So I suddenly realized that there was a book in here, and I thought, this is really strange. There's all this knowledge, and I felt like it had to get out there. It was like this story that had to be told. So I mentioned it to Amy Tompkins, who represents Deidre and me as our literary agent. And she said, this is an amazing idea, and I know a really great writer to co-author it with you. And so she introduced Deidre to me, and we really hit it off. And Deidre had done all this amazing research on the buffalo hunt and processing and that. And so we started working together, and that's where it came from.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so I have a question for Deidre. You're familiar with Ed's children's book, and I'm talking about his critically acclaimed Poopy Science. And can you tell us what your favorite part about this book is?
Yes, it can. Me and my grandson Declan have been reading Poopy Science all week. We are obsessed with it. And I think our favorite part, Ed, of this book is like on the first page, where Ed is drawn as a poop. Yeah, thanks, Ed. We really got a kick out of that. We love
That's
it.
really what I really look like that. This is just a hologram.
Okay, so awesome. Ed, what is your favorite Indigenous discovery or technology? Something that you use regularly in your own life?
I think there's a couple of things. I've always loved canoeing. From the time I was a kid, I remember, I grew up in the city, so I hadn't seen one, but I was out on the Ottawa River one time, and I met this friend of mine who lived on a farm, and he said, "Oh, my parents just got this canoe." And we took it out on the river, and I was just amazed at how easy it was to paddle. And, you could paddle it literally in a few inches of water. And it was such an incredible experience. I was about 9 years old. And then the other thing was how quiet it was. Like, we just lifted our paddles up, and it was, the sun was just going down, and we just let ourselves get carried by the current. And I remember watching this fox walk out of the forest, come down to the river completely unaware of us, and start drinking from the river. And I could see its tongue going in and out. And we were literally, I don't know, maybe 20 feet away, coasting by it. And it never did see us, and because we were so amazed at this sight that we just kept quiet. And so that really made an impression on me when I was about 9. And I still canoe to this day. So I guess that's my favorite, although corn and chocolate are close second and third.
All right, thank you. Ed, this was your first time co-authoring a book. What was it like working with Deidre?
It was great. I mean, we really respected each other, and I think Deidre really helped me do a better job of it, because when I first came to it, I approached it pretty much as technology, maybe the same way I did with the Poopy Science and the Germy Science. But Deidre made a really important point early on. I remember her saying in one of our first meetings with Amy, she said, Indigenous, she was talking about Indigenous people, and she said, I don't want this to be a bunch of history museum stuff by people who have vanished. Like, she said, we're still here. And I never forgot that, and so that was a really important paradigm shift for me mentally, just to realize, oh yeah, right. Like, we're not talking about people who died 1,000 years ago and disappeared, like, Indigenous people are still here. And then the other thing that Deidre really influenced me with was she went out and sought out people who were actually creating, or I would say this renaissance, recreating the technology. And so that got me doing the same thing. And so through that, through Deidre's example, I started, instead of just looking at things technically, I would go out and find people who were doing it. And for example, there's a couple in Swan River, Manitoba, Corinne and John Belanger. They own a company called Cree Star Gifts, and they make teepees the traditional way. They also make star blankets, really beautiful star blankets. But anyway, so I was interviewing Corinne about the teepees from a technical point of view. But then she told me this story that was just, it had nothing to do with the technical part, but it was just such a great story. It was about when she and John were courting. He was from the White Bear Nation, so he didn't live nearby. He would travel to see her. And where he lived was on the prairies, not a lot of trees. And when he'd come to court and they'd be driving around and he'd be looking out the window of their car and saying, wow, you've got really nice straight trees up here. Those would make such good teepee poles. And, they were just dating, but that ended up years later becoming their business. And just when you put a face to things and a story like that, and, it was really inspiring and it made it just really real. So I would say that's, those were the two things where Deidre really influenced me and I think helped me make a better book.
Okay, that's awesome. I agree. Deidre, what was your favorite chapter to write?
So I have two favorites. One was food and the other is clothing. And food, obviously, because, but the clothing, I have a few examples back here. And I think with the clothing, I just realized talking to the people doing the research was that how knowledgeable they were, not about clothing, but about animals, like animal biology. Like they knew animals inside and out. And the people who are working in these, you can see I have some Inuit bits and I have some mucklucks and some earrings from the book. Look at the details and it's just incredible the way they make these, but the knowledge of the animals in order to come up with the ideas to make that just blew me away, that the whole biology that I had not thought about that deeply before, that this was a whole biology thing that they were doing, not just sewing.
Thank you so much. All right, so thank you, Ed and Deidre. And I'd like to take a moment to open this up and see if our audience has any questions. Anyone? No, we're good. Okay, so thank you all for coming, and we are going to.
Oh, we're going to do book signing back here. If you have a book, I will sign it, and Ed will think nicely, nice thoughts about you.
I'm doing it right now, actually.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thanks, Ed. Bye.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you.